Our presenter here is Toblake Roy of BLF Canada. Toblake was born in Saint-Gélion, Quebec. In 1970, his family encountered the gospel. At 16, during a missions conference in his home church, the Lord called Toblake to full-time service. Toblake undertook the task of learning English by moving to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and then pursued a Bachelor of Religious Education in Pastoral Studies at Briarcrest Bible College, a Master's of Divinity at London Baptist Seminary, and a Master's of Theology and Old Testament at Detroit Baptist Theological Seminary, followed by a Master's of Art, Administrative Studies, in Higher Education and Organizational Leadership at Briarcrest Biblical Seminary. The Roys have served as church planters in Quebec with the Fellowship French Mission for 15 years. And since 2006, Toblake has served as the director of BLF Canada, which aims to reach French-speaking people for Christ through evangelism, literature, and pastoral training at home and overseas. Let's give Toblake, you've been here before, so it's not as though the first time we're giving you a welcome, but we're delighted to have you back here. Let's give him a warm welcome.
I am so happy to be in your midst. You have to forgive my English if there is a little bit, just a tiny little bit of an accent. It's because I happen to learn English from Germans and Ukrainians. So I can't help it. I had to copy their English. It just so happened that, as it was mentioned, my wife and I were called and sent to plant a church in Lachute, and we ended up in Lachute in 1994. Now, there is something that first you need to understand about the province of Quebec. And in order to understand this, we need to go back just over 400 years. Because what happens in history has ramification for a long time in the future. So, in 1608, there was the war between the French and the English on the plains of Abraham. The French lost. But in losing, they said to the English, if you give us 3 things, we'll quit fighting. So they said, what do you want? We want our language. And our language was French. So this is why Quebec is French and the rest of Canada is English. As simple as this. Then number 2, we want our religion. Their religion was Roman Catholicism. So this is why predominantly Quebec is still today Roman Catholic. Then they said we want to be in control of our education and health care. And this is why until the Quiet Revolution in the 1960s, it was the nuns, the priests that were teaching in schools, universities, colleges, and so on. So now that you know this, you need to understand that whenever you hear a political complaint from Quebec, it's rooted in 400 years of history. And you also need to remember, I am a Federalist. Never forget that. But you see, it doesn't matter when it comes to politics, because we as believers, we have one and only one citizenship. And that's in heaven. And wherever the need is for the gospel, this is where we want to be involved. Now, it made sense for Linda and I to be involved in the province of Quebec, and it just so happened that when I was 15 years old that I had been saved from the age of 13. Now I'm 15 years old and my whole family assists at the home Bible study. We have some 30, 35 people or so. And then the preacher didn't show up. So what do you do when you don't have emails, you don't have text messaging, you don't have Instagram, you have a phone? Yes, we did have that, so we called and there was no answer. We left a message, but when is he going to return the call? We didn't know. So my grandmother, who happened to be present, she says, Toblake, get up and preach. I'm 15 years old, Grandma. How can I possibly get up and preach? She said, I told you to get up and preach. Now, you did not want to hear Grandma say this a third time. So I got up and I said, I'm not sure what I should preach on, but I remember what I learned at the missions conference last week. And I can tell you what I've learned. It was a message based on Luke chapter 16, verse 19 to 31, on Lazarus and the rich man, the gospel preached from hell. And the man that was there, not wanting his 5 brothers coming to join him. So I repeated what I had learned and what I remembered, and then, guess what? The preacher shows up. So he had ended up in a snowbank, got stuck, took a while before he got unstuck, and now he is there, and I'm saying, okay, now I'm going to go and sit down. The preacher is here. Now, this man said this. He said, no, 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 young man. Finish what you have started. I will be very happy to sit down and listen to what you got to say. So with much fear and trembling, I finished my little sermonette, and then we sang a song, and then this evangelist came to see me, and he says, I'm persuaded, young man, that you have a gift for teaching the Word of God. When you finish high school, you should find a Bible school. Go there and see where the Lord will lead you from there. Well, the guy that had preached at this conference that I had been at, he was a graduate from Briarcrest. So I wanted to go to Briarcrest. I wanted to learn how to preach and share the Word of God. But my mom says, son, people in Saskatchewan, they speak English. You don't. I said, you're right, Mom. But you know, when those English people were born, they couldn't speak a word of English either. They were goo-goo gaga, just like I am today. And I said, if they can learn it, so can I. And it only took me 8 months before I was able to have my first dream in English. So if you try to learn a new language, you just try to dream in that language. And when that happened, you're on the verge of becoming bilingual. So then in 1994, the Lord called us to Lachute, Quebec. It just so happened that in this kind of a context, you know, in ministry, money is not always there. Now, 12 years I spent in the business world before I became a church planter. And the little group in Lachute, Quebec, it was an English church that was just starting a French Bible study, and all they could afford was $50 a week. Now, would you go to Quebec for $50 a week? You see, you need to know that you are called, and then you go in faith. And everything started to develop from $50 onward. I remember a church in Oshawa, Calvary Baptist Church. Linda and I had been trying to get into this church for a few years. And you know, it's hard for a new missionary to get into new churches, to raise support. And after 2 years, finally, we get a letter back that we were invited to come to their missions conference. And I had 5 minutes. 5 minutes to express to them the necessity to come to a seminar of 45 minutes. Now, I want to tell you, this has never happened to me since. But for the very first time in my ministry life, in over 30 years, I did not know what I was going to say in my 5 minutes. Every time I go somewhere, God gives me a message, I preach the message, and there it is. But for once, I had nothing. It is like if heaven was made out of steel. I prayed, asked, and nothing. Then Sunday morning came, and now I'm walking into the church with my family and 4 young kids, and I still don't know what I'm going to say. Then it just so happened that in the hall of that church, they had a missionary board. And that church was supporting some 30, 35 families across the world. And then you had a picture of the missionaries, a little string going to where they would be serving in the world. And I got curious and I said, I wonder who they are supporting in Quebec. So I went to the board, and lo and behold, there was the picture of Roland and Thérèse Royer. Now those were the missionaries that led my family and I to the Lord, along with some 30, 35 people in my communities, and they were supported by this church. And I said, thank you, Lord, I got my message, I got my 5 minutes worth. So I got up there and I said, I am so, so happy to finally meet my spiritual grandparents. For years you supported this family. And because of your support and your prayer, some people were saved in my community, including my family. Please come to the 45-minute seminar and I'll tell you all about it. It was packed. 2 weeks later, I did not know that that particular missionary had just retired from being a missionary. And they said this. They said, we want to continue our investment in Quebec. And what we were giving to this family, we now want to give it to the Roys. That $50 became $350 every month, increased every year on the base of inflation. Those are miracles, and when you're part of it, you know that the hand of God is working in the background because He has called you to ministry. Now, we can go further because there is so much more I want to tell you. We started, yes, in this little duplex, 2-bedroom, with a family of 6 people. Not a lot. Our kids were young, so that helped. They had not learned to complain too much, so we were happy. And this was the first year starting the French work. The English church in Lachute, this, by the way, is the second house we had, a little bit bigger, and the Lord has provided it. And the English church was then used for our services. We met on a Sunday afternoon, and the church started to grow, and we praised the Lord for that. Now, it just so happened that when a church grows, then you need more space. But you see, we have and still do have the same problem in church planting in Quebec. And this is the problem. What are you going to do? You have to support the pastor. You are maybe a group of 25, 30, 35 people. You need a building. So what are you going to do? Go to the bank, get a loan, build a building, or whatever. Now, it just so happened that financially speaking, from the time a church passed from 35 people to where they're able to support the building and the pastor's salary, they need to be somewhere around 75 to 100 people. So I knew this from my little business background I had. I said, this is not the way we're going to do it in Quebec. Because the church needs to be fully paid. So how do you go about paying fully for a church? Well, it all depends how much you pay for it. Simple as that. So then the group grew. We had the privilege of baptizing some people. And then it just so happened that this building that you see there was at the time an English church belonging to the Christian Closed Brethren. English. Now, it just so happened that because of the political situation in the province of Quebec, some of these English churches were kind of disappearing, and that particular church building had been closed for 9 years. Nobody in it. Now, I would regularly pass by it and pray, Lord, could this be our building? And there were 3 people left as trustees of that building, and they were all in Mississauga, Ontario, and 2 of them were still alive, 1 of them was still dead. So I figured, how are we going to raise the dead so we can come and sign the contract? Well, we managed to do it. Do you know you can actually get the signature officially from a dead person? That's right. If you want to know about it, I can tell you. So we did it. So I contacted the people, and of course the church building, well, it was so simplistic. I mean, the bricks were starting to bulge out because there had been some water infiltration, and in the winter it expanded. The roof was leaking profusely. They had 7 or 8 pail of water on the 2nd floor just for the water. And nobody was there, but there were 3 people still listed. So I contacted them. And I said, you have a building in Lachute. We just started a French ministry, and we need room to grow, so would your building be for sale? He said, how much do you want to offer? I said, $1. $1. And then they said, well, give us at least 10,000 for the piece of land that it's on, even though the building itself is not worth very much. So I said, I don't have 10,000. So I went home. And then I didn't stop there. I did all kind of research in all the records that the city of Lachute had of that building. Came to find out this. In 1872, a certain Christian brother from Detroit had donated a certain sum of money to the Christian brothers in Lachute so that they could purchase a piece of land and erect a building for worship purposes on that piece of land. I memorized the whole paragraph. Then I called the people in Mississauga. I said, I'd like to see you again. I have a new offer. So I went to meet with them, and he said, okay, what's your new offer? I said, $1. He said, well, you didn't go up very much. I said, I can't. And then I pulled out all the history of their building from 1872. I said, every generation this building has been transferred from one generation to the next for $1. I said, I can't insult you in offering more than that. I couldn't. And then a couple of weeks later, they said, okay, we'll let it go for $1. Now, all the church members in the French church said, take my $1, take my $1. I said, don't worry, we'll do a fundraising, you got to fix the place now. So we did fix the place. But where do you go? What do you do? Well, there was much to do. But in those days, the separatist government of Quebec, now get a hold of this, this is how God works, put aside $85 million for the restoration of worship buildings, whatever they were. So then, of course, there's money to be found. I gotta find it. So I called the government person in the area, and he said, oh, I am so sorry. You happened to be at the last minute of the last hour of the program, and we spent all the money. I said, by curiosity, how much money did you give to the evangelical churches for the restoration of the building? Well, we didn't give anything. We didn't know you existed. He said, what? I said, this is discrimination. We pay our taxes like everybody else, and we never receive a notice that this money was available. So I said, you got to do something to correct it. So then they invited me, and he told me, he says, yeah, we put $100,000 just aside for a situation just like that. Oh, I'm very good with numbers. Now that $100,000 is recorded in my brain by now. So there I am seated with the bishops, the people from the Anglican Church, from the Catholic churches, and every one of them was there, you know, for their stained glass windows, for their baptismal things in gold, and they wanted to renovate all of this, and there I am trying to renovate that building. So they said this to me. They said, you need to prove to us what is the value of that building. I mean, you got basically 4 walls, a roof that's leaking, and windows that are dating from 1872. So what can you do with this? So I studied the Christian close brethren, and here is the argument I used with the government people, and they accepted it. I said, the Christian brothers, their value was that they decided to put the value in the people rather than in their building. That's why their building is so simple. And that's what we need to recuperate. And they agreed. They said, we'll give you $65,000. Well, I knew they had $100,000. So I said, that's not enough. I said, you want me to have architectural plans? You want me to have professional people for the restoration? We put a roof on it that is metal, that's good for 100 years. I said, I need more. I knew they had $100,000. I mean, ask it shall be given. So finally they gave us $75,000. Now don't you think this is the hand of God at work? Using the money from the unsaved to accomplish the work of God? You see, money is not dirty. It just needs to be used. So then we restored completely. I mean, there was just one bathroom. There was one electrical outlet. They still had the hole in the ceiling for, the chimney for a wood furnace. That's how old this thing was. So then we restored that. But it was not sufficient because we didn't have Sunday school room classes. We didn't have handicapped bathrooms. We didn't have a kitchen in the place. So all of that, then we raised another $200,000 from people all over Canada, the States, and we had some 18 teams that came to build that section in the back with the Sunday school room, kitchen, and all of the stuff that you normally need in the church. Now, if you look at the bottom picture, you see that there is no windows, but we have walls and we have a roof. I have made a promise to the church, and I said we will not go into debt for a building. Because how can a church support both the building and the pastor's salary? That's how many churches ended up starting and closing in Quebec. And I understood this. So the church said, okay, Tom Blake, you go on deputation. So I went to the Southern Ontario churches. I had been to Bible school there, so I knew a lot of churches, went to it for several weeks, and then the people ended up saying to me, well, it's a great need, we'll pray for you. Well, I'm more of an active kind of guy, but I'll take your prayers anyway. But then on a Monday morning, I'm coming back home to Lachute on the 401, and I'm passing again by the very same church in Oshawa. And it's not very far from the 401, so I figured, hey, I'm just going to go and say hello to the secretary, because they're the one that disseminate our prayer letters, and they are now supporting us, so I'm just going to go say hello. So I get there, and the secretary says, oh, hi, Toblake, I'm so glad you're here. Said, you got to go and give a report to the missions committee. I said, what? Mission committees that meet on a Monday morning? Usually missions committee in churches meet, I don't know, Thursday night between 10 and midnight or something. Monday morning? And then she insisted so much that she knocked at the door and, oh, hi, Toblake, come and let us know how things are going in Lachute. So I said, well, it's actually very simple. As you know, we are in a building project and I need $10,000 so I can put some windows, some doors, some drywall, and so that because winter is coming, we don't want what we got there to go to waste. So they listened very carefully, and then they said, thank you very much. Well, I mean, I'm just there to deliver a message, right? So here I am walking in a parking lot, going to my car so I can go back to Lachute. And then I hear literally the chairman of the missions committee running behind me. And then when he got to me, he puts his arm around me and he says, Toblake, you have no idea what just happened. I says, no, I don't. He says, can you come back to the missions committee? Oh, well, it's Monday morning. I mean, it's not the day off for pastors anyway. Why not? So I went back to the missions committee. And they said, here's what happened. We have a gentleman at our church that is a church member. He's a single guy. He doesn't have any family. And he has an insurance policy that he donated to the church to be administered by the missions committee to any of the families that the church is supporting that have an active project and they need funds. He wanted that money of that insurance policy to go to these people. Well, they had an insurance policy of $300,000. Now, I don't know about you, but every once in a while, you know, carnality still kind of creeps in. So I didn't say that out loud, thank the Lord. But in my head I said, man, Toblake, you asked for only $10,000 and they got $300,000. They said, in 2 weeks, you're going to have a check through the mail. So you can buy those doors and windows. And then I said, can I ask something else? I mean, the Bible says, ask and it shall be given, right? You believe that? I do. So I simply said, I know very well that you have some very good contractor in this church. Would it be possible to organize some teams that would come and help me install those doors and windows and insulation? And they said, we probably could do this. And over the several months, they sent 3 teams. So that not only the windows and the doors were installed, the siding was put on, and also the insulation, the gyps, was taped. All we had to do was to paint it. That's how God works. And that is how we see God's hand at work. And when you happen to be in this kind of context, you venture ahead in faith, not knowing how God is going to provide. But when it is His work, it's His job to provide when the need is there. So furthermore, this is a little bit how the inside of the church looks like. And there is another French church in Lachute. This is an AGC church. Now the AGC church was legally linked with a camp in the area. A camp that's called Camp des Îles. And in Quebec, when you have a church, you can also have a presbytery or a men's. And that men's, even if it's owned by the pastor, can be exempt from municipal taxes. So the pastor of that church at the time, coming from the States, was in a position of having to go back because of lack of support, and he was wondering how he could have the municipal taxes taken off his house so it would be easier, and he didn't know how to do it. Well, I happened to be teaching that course at the time to pastors in Quebec to incorporate churches, and I said, here's how it's got to be done. So I coached them through all of that. And within a couple months, the church was legally separated from the camp. The camp remained as a charter, their own charter, and the church had now their own charter as well as a non-profit. Let me tell you another miracle story about this church here. This is Dalesville Baptist Church. It's just celebrated 200 years old. It's an English church, and for some time, for a long time in fact, they had a men's. This was the men's, and it's only about 2-3 blocks from the church. Now the pastor of that church was living with his wife and family in the men's, and we thought everything was good until the pastor's wife says, I don't want to live there anymore. And the reason was because in the attic of the men's there was a colony of bats. And because they've been there for years and years and years, and all of the residual situation of the bats started leaking in the kitchen wall down below, and she said, I can't do it anymore. So then they left for another house, but still pastoring the church. So now I got a hold of this, and I said, what? A church that's got a men's that is now not usable? So I asked for a meeting to the elders. And I said, you got a men's? Yes. It looks like you got a bat problem? Yes. I said, if I manage to get rid of the bat problem, could I use your men's for free for one of my servants in training so that he wouldn't have to pay rent? He said, well, how are you going to do that? They are a protected species. So how do you get rid of something that's a protected species? I said, well, that's my problem. So he said, well, if you can do it legally, fine. So here's how we did it. We waited until early spring. Early spring, there's still no mosquitoes, there's no flies, there's nothing of the sort, but there's still snow out there. And we took some 500 watts light bulb, several of them, into the attic. Then I had put people all the way around the house, and I said, you stand there and your job is to observe where they're getting out when I flip the switch. And then you see that ladder, move it and plug the hole. So that's exactly what we did. I didn't destroy them, but they went out as soon as I flipped the switch. And because it was just still spring, they had nothing to eat. And then in the days to come and weeks to come, we saw dead bats on snowbanks. I didn't kill them, they committed suicide. Then I raised a team of 4 guys. I said, guys, this is a mission. We're all going to go there. Do you know how much stuff there is in the building in an attic that's been there since 1925? The different layers of insulation, you know, whether it was old newspaper, whether it was sawdust, whether it was wood chips, and the rest of it. Well, we were there with our shovels. I said, guy, here's the mission. The 4 of us, when we're done, we have to be so satisfied, and the place is going to be so clean that we're going to climb up there, we're going to sit on one of the posts, and we're going to eat our lunch. If you can do this, then we invite the elders of Dalesville saying that their place has been satanized. So that's exactly what we did. We got 42 huge bags of all kinds of insulation and bat residue, and we purified the place, sanitized it, and then re-insulated it. And then I invited the elders from Dalesville. I said, come and look at your new manse. Wow, it's great. I says, now can my servant in training move in? You know, for what, 18 years now? There's been a missionary living in that manse for free. So in mission, it's not always the money you can raise, sometimes it's the money you can save. Whatever that missionary would have paid in rent to stay in Quebec, now he was in Quebec rent-free. Now, I see it as a miracle, folks. And to me, it seemed that over the years, God has called me much more to a ministry of recycling. Recycling things that they don't go to waste and disappear from the scene when people in generation past have invested their sweat and their donation to make a testimony. So this is the situation that, because to some extent of politics, now we needed to recuperate some of these things. You see those little critters? Well, you don't want to look at that too long before lunch. Let me tell you another story that is a miracle. This little church is located at 229 Mountain Street in Brownsburg, just not too far from the church in Dalesville. And this used to be called a Regular Baptist Church, Brownsburg Regular Baptist Church. Now, about, 18, 20 years ago or so, the Regular Baptist Association across Canada disassociated, which means that every church belonging to that association now became totally independent and on their own. The church members of that church have now moved to Dalesville Church, just about maybe 8 minutes further. That was great. But what to do with this building? So there were 3 trustees, at least these were all alive still, even though the younger one was 85 years old. So they called me and they said, we don't know what to do. We have the church, we have the manse across the road, and we have a corner lot for parking. What can you tell us? What can you suggest to us? I said, give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I asked to meet with them. I said, here's what I'm suggesting. I checked you out, and the manse that you own across the road is evaluated at $150,000. I said, your pastor that is now the pastor of Dalesville, and by the way, the church had become so low financially that they were about to put the pastor on unemployment insurance. I said, here is what you can do. You can offer the house where the pastor lives at $150,000. Offer him, ask him if he wants to buy it for $85,000. Why $85,000? Is because between $85,000 and $150,000 there's equity. No bank is going to refuse the pastor, which, by the way, didn't have a retirement fund because he had been a missionary in Japan for many years and for some reason didn't have a retirement fund. I says, at least the house can become a retirement fund for him. So they asked the pastor went to the bank, no problem, $85,000, this is now your house. So then I told the little trustees of that little church, I says, now you take the $85,000 that you got from the bank and you give it to Dalesville. Now the church has enough money to keep their pastor. And I said the corner lot that's evaluated at $23,500, I got 2 business people that are willing to buy it for $25,000. And they said, sold. So I said, now you take the $25,000 and you give it to Dalesville. So they have a nice little cushion so they can keep the ministry in English in their community. See, my whole goal was to seek a way to stabilize the area where we live. I mean, I see it not just as a pastor of a French church, but I'm also concerned with other churches that are seeking to accomplish the Great Commission as well. And then they said, what about the church? I said, the church, I want it. Yes, that's exactly the reaction they had. They said, yeah, you're going to do like you did in the shoot. You're going to offer us $1. I says, no. It's way too much. I actually want it for nothing. They said, how are you going to do that? I said, well, it's actually quite simple. I said, I checked you out, and you have if you leave me $10 in your bank account, I can take the church right off your shoulder. And I said, your fiscal year ends every year on the 30th of September. I said, on the month of September, I'm going to give you 4 names of new trustees that you are going to accept. They will already be vetted. And on the 1st of October, right at the beginning of the new fiscal year, 3 of you, I'm going to give me your resignation. So it's not a purchase, it's a takeover. See? That's how we get the church for free, Quebec. Is that amazing? So then, of course, they asked, what are you going to do with the church? I said, well, we happen to have a ministry in radio that we're starting, and we need to have a radio station which we built in Brownsburg. So interestingly enough, we, BLF Canada, invested quite a bit of money in transforming and getting the place ready. It's a section of about 4 feet by some 20 feet where they used to have their baptismal tank and chimney. We took all this out, redid the inside totally, and this is what it looks like. And that black box that you see is the actual radio station in Brownsburg that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the programming comes from our partner in Quebec City, Aujourd'hui l'Espoir. They send the programming via high-speed internet, and the system in the radio station sends it to the antenna that is outside. And as a result, the antenna sends it to the community. So now, in the near future, God willing, we want to plant another radio station in the church in Rivière-Rouge. We want to do the same thing in Montmagny, as well as Sawyerville, which is another French-English bilingual church now, 200 years old as well, and I can't wait to plant the 9-foot antenna on top of the peak of that church. That's going to be great. I want to tell you another miracle that happened about this here. You see the big house, it's actually a manse, and you see the building on the right-hand side, it's actually the church. This used to be an AGC English church. Well, it died. And the whole place became for sale. They were asking $385,000. So I figured I would ask. No harm in asking. I said, what about a place for a group of young people? So I called the head AGC guy in Toronto, and when he answered, he said, hi, Toblake. I don't know if you remember me, but you used to be on the PowerPoint presentation with your wife at the Fellowship Convention. And he was a Baptist pastor that became the head of the AGC in Toronto. I said, cool. So when I asked if he was open to sell his place for $1, he said no. They wanted to sell it at market value and invest the money in church planting anywhere across Canada. I said, great, I can respect that. So then, in the process of time, I became the director of BLF Canada, and we had at the time a board member that was a member of this church in Ponoka, which happens to be an AGC church. And I went there for the first time, I believe it was 2007 or thereabouts. The pastor that was the pastor there had been a pastor for 25 years. He comes and picked me up at the airport. No sooner was I in his car, he says, I am so happy. We've been wanting to plant a church in Black Falls, and now we have somebody that can... Whoa. I only planted one church. I'm certainly not a professional church planter by any stretch of the imagination. He says, yeah, but you know more than we do. I said, okay, let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting on Sunday afternoon, and they wanted to send their assistant pastor to plant a new church. I said, no, please don't do that. Do not send your assistant pastor to plant a church. Rather, what I would suggest is the pastor that's got 25 years of experience, send him to plant a church and keep the assistant pastor as the new pastor of the church. Because I said, the new guy, he's young, he doesn't have the experience in ministry, and you don't want him to bang his nose against the windows and then the work goes to nothing. I said, rather send the guy with experience in ministry, and the one that is in the mother church, he will be surrounded by a board of elders and people that can give him counseling. Do you know they actually listen to me? I said, wow. So now I visit the same church a year later. A year later, they were like totally discouraged. They had the legal aspect of the church all set up, but they didn't have any money to support the pastor with experience. I said, what do you mean you don't have the money? You just don't know where to look. The money is there. I said, it reminded me of John 21. You know, after the resurrection, and the disciples didn't believe he had resurrected from the dead, and then the disciple decides to go back to fishing, and they fish all night, and they caught nothing, and then Jesus is on the seashore, and he said, boys, your problem is that you're a bunch of lefties. Oh, that's basically what he told them. Because they had been fishing, obviously, all night on the left-hand side of the boat. He says, hey, the boats are not on the left. They're on the right side of the boat. Sometimes we can be so close to a solution that we miss it. But man, sometimes, you know, the distance between absolute failure and total success is only the thickness of your boat. So he said, well, we asked the AGC Association in Alberta for funds, and they don't have funds. I said, well, you just didn't go high enough. Go to Toronto. I know they have $385,000 because they just sold a building in Lachute. They called, and for the next 5 years, they had $10,000 support for 5 years so that they can continue to plant the church in Blackfall. Now, this is how God works. You know, there's a nice little community church in Blackfall, Alberta, because of resources taken from Lachute and going in that direction. So God places you in situations, in context, give you information that you may not be able to do something about right away, but the information is there, and this is one of those situations where that information became very, very useful. Haiti had had the privilege of teaching there for a few years, and now because of the political situation, I could no longer teach. I mean, it's not my fault. I'm white. They see me come from quite a distance. So I usually have the Linda board that I need to clear before I get to the mission field like Haiti. And Linda, by the way, is my wife. In any case, we at BLF Canada have an ongoing ministry in Haiti. And in the last few years, even though I haven't been able to go there, I was able to give counseling at a distance so that they would continue to proceed with their project of building a Bible school. So we now have a reasonable amount of money in the BLF coffer for literature for Haiti. I am on the lookout so I can find a secure way that we can send those Bible concordances and dictionaries so the pastors can benefit from it. See the building in the back? In the background, that's the new Bible school. And we praise the Lord for it, that the ministry is going on in spite of the missionary not being able to go back for the time being. We also provide some Sunday school material that is widely distributed among the churches in Haiti. And this is some of that promotion there that's been done. This is the latest graduation class at that Bible school. So imagine now with technology you can be involved in ministry at quite some distance. And this is one of those situations. I want to tell you about this camp. This is a One Hope Canada camp. There's 2 of them in the province of Quebec. And this is a challenge for any one of you that may want to consider ministry that is cross-cultural. You come to Quebec, we will teach you French if we have to, and we will be excited to have you, and we will even put you to work. That happens to be one of my spiritual gifts, and I delight in it very, very much. Now, it just so happened that this camp, following COVID, was about to close. It came within inches of closing. And when the board was meeting to finally take the final decision to close the camp, it became obvious that my English son-in-law, I say my English son-in-law because I also have a French son-in-law, and he was originally from Alberta in Western Canada, but's been in Quebec now for quite some years. And it just so happened that he is a captain in the cadets, and he is teaching kids 10 months out of the year, and it only made sense. You know, the will of God is not that hard to discover. It often follows a logical scenario. And I said, here is somebody that is trained, paid to be trained by the Canadian government to work with kids. And what's another 2 months working with kids at camp? So then Zach and Jael, just as the board was meeting, they received an email saying that Zach and Jael were interested to work at the camp as director. Now, you have to understand that the camp has been closed for several years, with not having been closed necessarily properly. Some water line froze, busted, created some molds. So another ministry of recycling. People from 1985 had invested lots of money in that camp. I can't let it go to waste. So, with the help of teams, guess from where? From Manitoba! Yes! We had people from Grundle, we had people from Berkveld, and they came to lend a hand. And if you, as a church, consider sending a team to work in Canada, why not consider Quebec? You still do not need a passport of a visa yet. So get it while the going is good. And we now have a church in Harrow, Ontario that is raising funds, and they're planning to send a team in the spring to help with some of those repairs. This was done, the lighting system on the ceiling was done by a team from Manitoba, and the walls were repainted as well. And you know, when you have you know, the 1970s neon lights that are 8 feet long, and you can't even buy the bulbs for it anymore, so all of those need to be taken out and replaced by Dell lights. This is what that team has done, and they've done the same thing in the other part of the cafeteria as well. And of course, because we have several acres of land, sometimes trees will fall, they get sick, we need to cut them down. So what do? Then you get the whole community of homeschooler association to come by and help in taking that tree apart. So ministry is a lot of fun. Now this is the house where Zach and Jael live. Now the house had been closed for several years. Much work had to be done, including the removal of some molds, the replacement of toilets, and replacement of hot water tank that were there since, 2005. And the insurance company, if it's older than 10 years old, they don't really want to insure you because of the potential of breaking down. So the kitchen was also renovated. We put some stainless steel countertop, and this was also done by a team from Manitoba. And all of the shelving for the kitchen needed to be replaced. It used to be all wood shelving, and according to the standard of food in Quebec, it needed to be in metal. Don't ask me why. I do not know how the government always reasons. But we did it. So we replaced hot water tank, got rid of some mold, reinstalled vanities, reinstalled toilets, and we also built a handicap ramp to be accessible, as well as a porch for the house. And this is the new dorm, and some renovation is going on. It could accommodate up to 96 people. And we have also the old dorm that eventually I will need a team of young people that are able to work with steel toe boots. I mean, I have had some team that came from the States and they were in their sandals. So anyway, so the first thing we needed to go is to Walmart and buy them all some steel toe boots on the construction site. So you can bring them on the plane if you take them off when you go through security. They will allow that. So just saying, come prepared. We have a few hammer. Probably not recommendable that you put one of those on the plane. We have a climbing tower. If you feel so inclined to be artistic, I would certainly love to have a Bible verse of some kind right at the top and repaint the whole tower. So if you're young and courageous and are artistic, I will rent one of those things that lifts up. I'll be at the bottom pushing buttons. Now the pool. The pool is in a pitiful, unusable situation. But you know that church in Dalesville? That the money from the Brownsburg church and the Ments, well, now they were in a financial position to donate $30,000 to the camp. $20,000 toward the pool and $10,000 toward anything else that the camp might need. So you see, everything that has been done in the past is still being reseeded right now to recuperate the camp for the glory of God. So not only do we need people, cabin leaders, people to work in the kitchen, and the camp now, we managed to work it in such a way that the water does no longer freeze in winter time, and the solution came again from Manitoba. Put an electrical wire right into the pipe, some 30-35 feet, plug it in, and the water will never freeze again. That's exactly what we did, and praise God. You know, good ideas are coming out of Manitoba. You know, don't let that go to waste. Keep using it. So now they have a solution for this coming spring for the pool, and hopefully it will be usable this coming summer. So BLF Canada, come to the booth S26, and you'll have a chance to speak with Jael, my daughter, that is one of the director with her husband of Camp des Îles, One Hope Canada Camp. And if you would like to talk to me about anything that's French related, and I do speak in both official languages, so do not hesitate. I will take you aside to speak to you in French, so that no other people are offended.